Hi, and welcome to another podcast in the Employment Relations series. Today, we're going to start to talk about bargaining behaviours. We're going to have two sessions covering various aspects of bargaining, because bargaining is a key component of managing the employment relationship. If we start from the presumption that we don't, as managers, have it all our own way, that we have to reach some kind of an accommodation with other interested parties, with the workforce, with their representatives, with trade unions, then the way in which we go about engaging with them, the way we go about reaching these accommodations becomes a crucial management skill set. It's something that we absolutely have to know how to do. And so bargaining is a key part of the employment relationship from that point of view. And this is a crucial skill, not just from a management perspective, but also from a union perspective. The union engages in the relationship in the same way that management does. And so the more skillful, the more effective the bargaining behaviours that both sets of representatives are able to bring into the relationship, the more effective they're likely to be, and the more they're likely to be able to achieve the objectives of their principles, the more that those distinct sets of interests that we've been talking about from different employment relations actors are likely to be fulfilled. So bargaining is important. Now you'll notice that this is part one of two sessions that we're going to have in this series. And this is because bargaining is a very wide range of activities, and there are various different types of bargaining behaviours that we need to consider. Probably the most common form of bargaining we often see in the news, on the TV, where there is an industrial dispute going on, usually over issues of pay level, is something that we're going to call distributive bargaining. And that's not the focus of what we're talking about today. That's going to be the subject of another session that you can look at and that we'll consider towards the end of this series. The two aspects of bargaining that we're going to look at in this session today are what we call integrative bargaining, and sometimes you'll see it referred to as interest-based bargaining. And the second one is something called attitudinal structuring. Now both of these types of bargaining behaviours have been described by Walton and McKersey in a seminal text from back in the 1960s, a text which in many ways hasn't really been surpassed in terms of its depth and in terms of its complexity of coverage of these bargaining behaviours. Integrative bargaining has certain characteristics which we're going to talk about in detail, but I want to just talk about it in terms of distinguishing it from that distributive bargaining behaviour that I talked about a moment ago. Because integrative bargaining, whether it's very different from distributive bargaining, is about cooperation. It's about joint problem solving. It's about coming up with solutions where everybody wins, rather than going in, beating each other up and seeing who's the strongest, who can walk away with the biggest share of the spoils. So it's quite different in style, quite different in terms of objectives. So we're going to spend most of our time in this session talking about integrative bargaining. Now obviously, given some of the other developments that we've seen recently in employment relations, the whole discussion around partnership in employment relations, the whole discussion about the development of cooperative rather than adversarial types of employment relations. Integrative bargaining, the ability to pull off integrative bargaining activities is an important aspect of some of those kinds of debates, and something that we should pay particular attention to. We're going to be concerned with the processes of integrative bargaining, what happens, how is it distinguished from some other types of bargaining, particularly distributive bargaining, and what's its scope, where can we apply it, what are the limitations to integrative bargaining activities. So that's the first and the main thing that we're going to talk about within this podcast. The second thing that we're going to touch on towards the end of the podcast is something called attitudinal structuring. Now, attitudinal structuring is something we might not even recognise as a kind of bargaining activity at all, but it is something that Walton and McKersey distinguish as one of these key kind of bargaining behaviours that they spent such a long time studying. And attitudinal structuring is different in that it is largely concerned with the way in which the sides to the bargain, me and you, the union and management, whoever it might be, attempt to alter the attitudes that are held by either side. In a way, it provides us with the mechanisms to effectively play the political game between the bargaining parties. And so again, we can imagine that within the context of an ongoing employment relationship, the ability to alter and affect in a positive way the attitudes of the other side towards us can be an extremely powerful and useful set of skills, and also has usefulness beyond the employment relationship if we think about broader relationships that we may be involved in. We're going to focus particularly on something called attitude change theory, which provides us with a very useful and simple set of tools that can help us to understand how this kind of attitudinal structuring might be able to work, and how we can use it to our own advantage. We will touch very briefly on a little bit of reinforcement theory as well, but we're going to focus primarily on attitudinal structuring. But we're going to start with a discussion on integrative bargaining. Now, I mentioned that integrative bargaining is quite different to the kind of things that we might generally associate with bargaining within an employment relations context. And the main reason for that is the issue that I mentioned a moment ago, that it's characterised by this emphasis on problem solving, that this makes integrative bargaining into something quite different from the traditional kinds of bargaining that we typically associate with employment relations, where we often think about those bargains as being a win-lose situation. For me to get a pay increase means you, as the employer, have to maybe take a hit on your profit margins, or you as the shareholder have to take a hit on your dividend. That there is a real and obvious trade-off between a win for one and a loss for the other. And these are often the ways in which industrial relations or employment relations bargaining pans out. With integrative bargaining, the intention is to develop a win-win situation. Now, if integrative bargaining works properly in a very pure form, the idea is that the parties can engage in such imaginative, such innovative problem solving, they can find brilliant solutions to the issues that face them both, that if it's done right in its pure form, then the problems will be resolved with corresponding and equal gains for both parties, that a solution can be found to the problems that are up for debate, where both parties gain equally from the solutions that are discovered. Now, of course, in real life, it's likely to be a little bit more messy than that. And often one side or the other might have to make some small sacrifices in order for the employment relationship overall to make large gains. And so there may be some trade-offs at the margin, but these aren't the kind of trade-offs that we think about in other types of bargaining, where it really is a kind of win-loss. But it might be about one side wins a little bit more than the other, or there might, on a particular issue, have to be a small sacrifice in order for large gains to be realised, and that position might be reversed over other issues, so that overall there is a balance of gain from both sides within the employment relationship. But the point is that this isn't a simple trade-off type of bargaining. It isn't the type of bargain where one person to win, the other has to lose. It's a focus upon finding imaginative solutions to problems. It's about finding solutions where everybody is able to walk away with a win. Clearly, there's, on the face of it, provides us with something which is hugely attractive if this is something that we can actually pull off in real life. So, what kind of things are we talking about here with integrative bargaining? Because if it does provide those kinds of possibilities, why not just use it everywhere? Why not use it in every situation? Why don't we see organisations using it on a more general basis? Why hasn't it become the predominant form of bargaining within employment relationships? Well, part of the answer to that might be because of other issues. It might be because of the values that inform the employment relationship. It may be that there's not sufficient trust within the employment relationship. It might be that the intent to work cooperatively with the other side is not there, and that's just a reflection of the nature of the relationship itself. Outside of that, then clearly there are certain types of problems that will be more conducive to this type of problem solving than others. Clearly, we need to be able to find at least one solution to the problems that we're talking about where both parties can improve their position, that there is actually an integrative solution to the problems that we're trying to resolve. If that solution doesn't exist, if there is only a win-lose type of solution, then integrative bargaining really won't apply, although the process might actually help us to identify that is the case, because it's a very useful problem-solving process on its own. But we are looking for solutions where both parties can improve their position, or at the very least to require only a token sacrifice from one party to the bargain to enable substantial gains for the other, as we've discussed earlier. Now, for this reason, issues of pay level, the amount of pay, the extent of cash pay that people might receive within an employment relationship, very fundamental aspect of the kind of conflicts of interest within the employment relationship, that becomes quite a tricky issue for integrative bargaining. And Walton and McKersey made this quite explicit. They described it being that, well, you can only split a dollar so many ways. In effect, you can only split it by either you getting it or me getting it. $1 more for you is $1 less for me. There isn't a clever way of finding a solution to pay level issues whereby that dollar gets multiplied into two. So pay level might be a tricky issue to deal with integratively, and that might be just an absolute limit to the kinds of situations that we can apply integrative bargaining to. Having said that, other aspects of the reward bargain may be conducive to mutual problem-solving activities like this. If we think about the kind of flexibilities that we have in relation to design of bonus schemes, to the operation of pay-for-performance types schemes, there's a lot of kind of flexibility within these systems. There are lots of different ways that we can operate them, and it may well be that we can find solutions in any given situation to some of those other aspects of the reward bargain. So back when Walton and McKersey were writing in the 60s, rewards were relatively simple in many cases. There weren't the complexities in the reward design that we often see in organisations today. And so the extension of integrative bargaining to other aspects of the reward bargain may be something excuse me, that's possible that Walton and McKersey may not have anticipated. So if those are the kinds of situations that integrative bargaining might be applied to, what kind of behaviours do we see within integrative bargaining? What does it look like? What kinds of behaviours do we require people to exhibit in order for integrative bargaining to be successful? One of the key issues about integrative bargaining is the issue of motivation. Joint problem solving is difficult. It's a challenge. It's a challenge to cooperate with our opposite numbers within any kind of relationship, but often particularly so within an employment relationship that might have a history of conflict, that might be affected by problems of adversarialism, low trust, and so on. So motivation, being motivated to actually get together, to work, to cooperate with the other side, to solve those problems, is a very, very important aspect of integrative bargaining behaviour, and a key criteria as to whether or not we're going to be able to engage in this successfully. We can also see that if the motivation to solve problems is coming much more strongly from one side than the other, then that can cause particular problems within the integrative bargaining process. If you're working very hard to find solutions and the other side is kind of slightly detached, the other side isn't really paying that much attention to those kind of joint problem solving activities, not really trying too hard to find solutions that will provide you with as much benefit as them, that can create all kinds of tensions and effectively cause the process to disintegrate. So motivation is very important and is very is kind of crucial criteria to get this kind of process off the ground and to keep it flying, if you like. So motivation is something we need to pay particular attention to. Something else that's really important, again, is something that we'll see distinguished from those kind of distributive bargaining behaviours that are maybe more traditional. And this is about the importance of access to information. Often in a traditional distributive type of bargain, there is a real emphasis on closing down information channels, of limiting the amount of information that we put on the table, that we put within the bargaining forum. And the reason for this is because we're trying to pursue a kind of partial line with distributive bargaining. We're trying to achieve something for our side, which means that we have to convince the other side of something which might not be entirely true if we, would have put every bit of information out there in relation to it. Now, with integrative bargaining, we are on the search for imaginative solutions to problems. That's the key. Those are the kind of key aspects of integrative bargaining. And so we need to make sure that the information is all out there. If it's not all out there, if some of it's held back, then that may close down opportunities for solutions to problems that otherwise might become apparent. So all the information has to be out there and it has to be shared equally between the parties. We also need to make sure that there is a high level of verbal competence. We have to be able to express ourselves. We have to be able to find the language that allows us to explore the potential solutions that we might be playing around with. Without that verbal competence, we may run into all kinds of cul-de-sacs and dead ends, simply because we're not able to explain ourselves to our bargaining partners effectively. So the success of problem solving depends upon these two aspects: access to information and verbal competence. Now, I want to stress again this issue of communication, because communication in integrative bargaining scenarios is very different to distributive bargaining situations. Now, just like I mentioned before, under distributive bargaining, information channels may be closed down for kind of partisan reasons. Similarly, communication channels would be very controlled under distributive bargaining. We want to make sure that we control the message that we're getting to the other side, because we're pursuing a very particular and distinct line. We're trying to pursue our position. Now, the opposite is true under integrative bargaining. We want multiple communication channels. We want as much interplay, as much to and fro as we possibly can get. So we want all of those communication channels maximized, because the more communication channels that we've got, the more information exchange will go on, and the more potential there is for those solutions to problems being identified. Now, of course, in order to lubricate these communication channels, we need a certain type of climate, a certain degree of trust, a certain belief that what we say won't be misrepresented, won't be played back against us. And so we need a certain type of environment, a certain type of climate, a certain degree of trust. If that's not there, then we maybe hold back. Maybe we won't say the thing that we were thinking about. Maybe, not even just because we think it'll make us sound stupid, but because we might feel that it puts our position at risk, and we start to become more defensive, and we start to close down the communication channels, and we start to not explore all of the potential solutions that we might otherwise explore. So communication, the nature of communication, and the climate for communication are very important aspects to ensuring that integrative bargaining solutions have as good a chance of being achieved as they possibly can. So, what does the process itself look like? This is a simplified model of Walter McKersey's integrative bargaining process. Actually, no, it's a simplified version of my model of interest-based bargaining, but for all intents and purposes, these are effectively the same thing. So we start off with the identification of a problem. Now, again, this is different from going into a traditional bargaining arena and saying, this is what I want. This is about saying this is an issue that faces us both. And so the recognition of the problem in the first place, the identification that this is something that does affect us, that has got mutual ramifications, something that we both have an interest in resolving, is an important first step in pursuing problems. If we don't see that this is a problem for us, why the hell should we pursue its solution? And so problem recognition is an important first step. Equally important is the process of problem definition, because getting a handle on what the problem actually is, really tying it down, identifying what its characteristics are, is important to make sure that we start off our hunt for solutions to the problem looking in the right kind of direction. So we need to pin down at a fairly early stage just what exactly is it that we're talking about here. Because, we can go in and start talking about something that means something from our perspective, and the other side may think, oh yeah, this is, this raises an issue for us as well. But effectively, we may be talking about two different things. And of course, if you are talking about two different things, you're never going to get a mutually acceptable solution to it. So you need to be clear right at the start, what exactly is this thing that you're dealing with, to make sure you define the problem effectively. Now, of course, once that problem is up and running, set front and centre, clearly defined, then the integrative bargaining process is all about finding alternative solutions. And there may be a dozen different solutions to this problem that we've recognised. The problem may be that they may not be equally acceptable to both sides. So if that search for alternative solutions doesn't come up with something that we can live with, or maybe doesn't come up with much of anything at all, it may be that we have to go back and maybe redefine the problem, to restate what it is that we're looking at, to maybe refine it more clearly. Maybe the lack of our ability to find effective, acceptable alternative solutions is because we haven't gone through that first process properly. So we look for alternative solutions, and then we also go beyond that and think through what the consequences of those solutions might be, because it's not just finding an answer, it's also thinking, okay, what happens next? What are the consequences? What happens a few steps further down the line? So we work through the consequences of those solutions, and we evaluate various different alternatives against each other, and we look at the pros and cons, and we look at where the greatest source of mutual benefit might be, but where the mutual gains might be found amongst the various alternatives. And again, that might require us to go back, maybe even to the start again, because we can't find a solution which provides sufficient mutually acceptable advantage to the parties. So maybe we have to go back to the beginning and look at the problem again. Or maybe it's just a question of going back part of the way and looking for some other solutions that might provide greater mutual benefit. So you can see the kind of exhaustive process that we go through, and the reason why it's so important that we are highly motivated to engage in this kind of activity. Because if we're not, we're going to give up part of the way through this. We're going to go back to either trying to impose our own solutions on the other side, or maybe we're going to go back into kind of adversarial types of patterns. This isn't an easy option. This requires a great deal of commitment and a great deal of motivation to the process. So we go back and we find those solutions, we search for the consequences, and we evaluate the alternatives that are available to us. And at some point, we find our mutually satisfactory solution. We find the solution to our problem that provides the acceptable degree of mutual gain for both of us. And that's the one that we adopt. So let's look at some of these stages in a little bit more detail, going right from the start to the end, and flag up some of the issues that we might come across along the way. Preparation, any kind of bargaining, preparation is a key issue. We'll talk about preparation in relation to distributive bargaining in another podcast. Well, preparation here takes on particular characteristics, and it's not just about preparing ourselves. It's not just about preparing ourselves to go in and be open and trusting and supportive and to engage. It's not just about that. It's also remembering that we're going into a bargain, not just representing ourselves, but representing our principles, representing the people whose interests are really at stake here. So from the management side, we're representing the interests of the employer, the shareholders, the chief executive, whoever it might be. Those are the interests that we need to be clear about. If we're on a union side or an employee representative side, we need to remember that the people that we're representing are the workforce. That these are the people whose interests are really at stake here. So if we're going to engage in integrative bargaining, if we're going to engage in this kind of mutual, trusting, supportive, problem-solving process, it's not just that we need to be ready to engage in that kind of behaviour ourselves, but we also have to think about how ready our principals are for us to behave like that, to represent their interests and their objectives in that particular way. Because, this is a difficult step for people to take, particularly if you're coming from an employment relationship that it may have had many ups and downs, it may have had some conflict in there, it may have had some adversarial patterns over the years. And so all of a sudden for your bargaining agent to turn around and say, well, actually, what we're going to do now is do something entirely different. We're going to trust the other side, and we're going to show them everything. We're going to show them all of our ideas. We're going to show them all of our positions. We're going to lay everything out on the table because we need to find some imaginative solutions. That's a big step. for people to allow you as a bargaining agent to take. And that's not something you can do just before a bargain takes place. You need to lay down some of these these expectations a long time in advance, laying down a framework of trust, laying down a framework where you're willing to engage in a very different way with the other side. Unless you have that, you're not going to be able to engage in genuine problem-solving behaviour, because at all points you're going to be held back by your principals, who are going to say, oh, what the hell are you doing? You know, what's all this about? We haven't got that degree of trust. We don't believe that these people are going to honour, you know, whatever objections people might have, they're going to find it. And so your preparation is very important, particularly on getting your principals signed up to this kind of approach. The opening of a bargain, again, takes on particular characteristics in relation to an integrative approach. In many types of bargains, you know, the kind of most common sense types of bargains that we think about, we normally start out with a bargaining position. You know, I'm willing to pay this, or we want that. And then you kind of bargain, do a to and fro kind of thing to see who can get closest to their initial demand, or their initial bargaining position. The opening of an integrative bargaining is really very different, and this is more concerned with about defining the problem in the way that we talked about earlier. It's about identifying the framework within which the negotiations are going to take place. So again, very different kind of style, about opening up the discussion rather than closing it down to certain bargaining positions. And so it's important to see that distinction within integrative bargaining, and to use the opening in order to actually open up the discussion rather than close it down. Then I suppose probably the most important phase of the integrative bargaining process, which is about the exploration phase. Now this is about brainstorming. And it's it's very clear. This is unambiguous. We need as many people as possible involved. You know, pitching or any kind of idea into the melting pot to see just how some of these ideas might fly. And again, you know, just to distinguish this from more traditional types of bargaining, where we will close down the communication in ways that I've talked about before, where exploration, where we do push things around the edges, that would tend to be through kind of, you know, cloak and dagger exchanges, away from the bargaining table, beyond the view of the other people who are involved in the negotiation, even, really behind closed doors. Those kinds of exchanges, which we call corridor exchanges, typically between the chief negotiators, just seeing where there might be wiggle room, or room for manoeuvre, room to move in a different kind of direction. Here, that kind of exploration is upfront, it's unambiguous, it's there, it's in front of everybody, it's on the table, and it involves as many people as possible, just pitching all kinds of ideas in to see where they might get us. It's also important to state that the kind of exploration that we're talking about in integrative bargaining, it's not about splitting the difference between positions. It's not about saying, I want 10 and you'll give me 5, let's settle on 7. It's about a genuine exploration of really imaginative alternatives, of doing things in entirely different ways, of, I hate the phrase, but thinking outside of the box, of trying new things, finding genuinely new and imaginative solutions to the problems that the organisation might be facing. Now, clearly, this kind of upfront brainstorming is a risky process for parties to an employment relationship, because everything's out there, because nothing is kind of forbidden from discussion. All of the parties' weaknesses and vulnerabilities are on show. And this is why it's particularly important that in order to engage in this kind of bargaining process, you've got a very clear mandate from your principals. Because if you haven't, then you are exposing your principals to a great deal of risk. And, not just that that's a bad thing from the principal's point of view, but from your point of view as a bargaining agent, that would place your position as bargaining agent under quite a degree of jeopardy. So you need to have a clear mandate from your principals to engage in this kind of thing. Once those issues have been explored, then you need to start to do that kind of evaluation process to focus down from a very large range of alternatives to look at which ones provide the most potential to maximise the mutual gain. Now, there is a bit of a temptation during this phase of the integrative bargaining process to kind of revert to type. That once you've done all this imaginative problem solving behaviour, once you've thought, well, we could do this, that, or we could do something else entirely, that you start to think in a more partisan way when it comes down to the point of deciding which way you're going to go. Because, like I mentioned at the start, unless you're in a very pure integrative bargaining process where you can find a solution where the gain is indeed mutually beneficial, absolutely equal between the parties, then there are some solutions which are going to be a bit better for some rather than others. And so at this point, there is a real temptation for negotiators to start to jump in and to kind of steer the discussion towards those solutions which provide most gain for their side rather than which provide most gain overall. So whilst the integrative bargaining process is about optimizing the mutual gain, about providing the biggest gain, even if that tends to go to the other side rather than your side, the temptation is to kind of drag it back and to grab as much gain as you can for yourself. Now, of course, the risk is not just that people do this, but in the fact that people do this, that it can undermine the whole process, that it damages the trust that might have built up between the negotiators, that might damage the trust that the principals have for the process, and that if principals on either side are seen as doing this at all, or maybe beyond a certain minimally acceptable amount, then it kind of causes the whole process to collapse, to expose the process as a bit of a fraud, a bit of a sham, and the whole thing disintegrates. So we've gone through that process, we've looked for the solutions, we've found the one that we think is best, and so the next challenge, the final challenge in a way, is to agree. These are this is what we are actually going to do, and the aim here, just to reiterate, is to achieve a genuinely mutually satisfactory agreement, not just the least worst outcome that you often get in a distributive bargaining situation, but a genuinely mutually satisfactory agreement. There are a number of challenges to getting this kind of agreement. Reaching agreement in itself is always difficult, because that's the point where the kind of hammer comes down and that's what we're going to do, and that's always just a difficult kind of psychological moment. Typically difficult under distributive bargaining should theoretically be easier under integrative bargaining approaches, because you've gone through all of the solutions. You've gone around the houses so many times. You've looked at all of the potential consequences. You've kind of really examined all of the alternatives that you might have available to you. So the agreement itself should be easier than it is under distributive bargaining. The other issue about agreement is, again, not just the issue of agreeing amongst bargainers, but also about convincing principals. Now, we'll talk about this issue of convincing principals in another session under inter-organisational bargaining. The particular challenges in relation to integrative bargaining is that if you have had to give way, if you have had to reach a solution which is kind of better for the other side than it is for you, then there is a challenge in convincing your side that that was really necessary, that those concessions were unavoidable, that there wasn't a better solution which worked better for everybody. And again, this is where it's really important that you've got your principals on board beforehand about the whole process of integrative bargaining, because people look at the outcome, and going into a process is one thing, saying we'll cooperate, we'll give a bit here and there, but actually looking at the deal and thinking, well, we could have got better for us. We could have done a bit better if we'd had a different approach. That's a more difficult thing, and so you need to be really sure that you've got the commitment of your principals again. Otherwise, you're going to be facing a challenge to your position as the bargaining agent. Now, of course, the real benefit of integrative bargaining is not just those kind of short-term agreements. It's not just that you are looking to identify good quality solutions for particular issues, but the real benefit of the agreements that you make under integrative bargaining is about the long-term benefits of those agreements to the employment relationship, because the activities of integrative bargaining require trust, and they require mutual support, and they require a good quality of relationship for it to work. But of course those things build on themselves, and they become kind of self-reinforcing and tend to feed back into the employment relationship itself. And so it's important to recognise that beyond those specific agreements themselves, the long-term benefits of those agreements is that they tend to improve the quality of the employment relationship as a whole. And so we need to be aware of that goal as we seek agreement on those individual issues. So that's integrative bargaining. What we're going to turn to now is a second aspect of this podcast, which is about attitudinal structuring, particularly focusing on attitude change theory at first. Now, as I mentioned at the start, attitudinal structuring is about how we influence the other side. Now, there are a variety of ways that we could think about this, and all kinds of psychological theory that we could draw on, but we're going to focus on attitude change theory, or cognitive balance theory. And cognitive balance theory is based on the idea that people tend to prefer consistency among their perceptions and beliefs. That they feel happier if everything kind of matches and evens up within their relationships and within their interactions with other things that they have to deal with, which sounds a little bit vague, but we'll kind of clarify this as we go through and firm it up with some specifics in a little bit. Now, because people have this preference for consistency, what they tend to do is to eliminate inconsistencies amongst those perceptions, whether those perceptions are about other people or whether those perceptions are about certain objects. Now, because there is this desire to get rid of inconsistencies, there's a potential available to influence the other side, to kind of take advantage of this desire to eliminate inconsistencies. It provides us with the ability to predict the way in which people might behave in a given set of circumstances. And so if we can manipulate the circumstances, we can change the way that people might think, which is very useful in terms of managing an employment relationship. So let's have a think about one or two examples of how this might work and how this might provide us with opportunities for manipulation. So cognitive balance theory tends to think about a relationship, a kind of triangular relationship like this. So between you and me, there is a relationship and a kind of perception. There's also a relationship and a perception between both of us and other objects, the thing at the top of this triangle. This might be an object, it might be all kinds of things within the employment relationship, and we have attitudes towards it, and we might have a sense of responsibility towards that thing as well. So let's have a look at an example of how this kind of set of perceptions might play out. So we start out with how you feel about this thing, whether it's I don't know, a pay system or whatever it might be. You approve of it, and so we're going to mark that with a plus, a positive sign. There's a positive relationship, an approval between you and this thing. I am seen as responsible for that thing, marked with the A here in the kind of nomenclature of this kind of theory. So you like this thing, I'm responsible for it, and you like me. Now, because all of the elements in this model are of a kind of positive nature, approval is, responsibility is a positive element as well. So we're balanced on all sides. The perceptions within this relationship are balanced. There's no pressure for change anywhere. Everything's consistent. You like the thing, I'm responsible for that thing, and you like me. Everything is balanced, and we don't feel any inconsistencies within our understanding of those elements within the relationship. Another example can work in a similar kind of way. So we start out again with this kind of triangular relationship. In this case, you disapprove of the thing. I'm seen as responsible for the thing, and you dislike me. Again, the system is balanced. There's no pressure for change within this kind of framework. Now let's look at an example where the balance maybe isn't there. So we've got the three-sided relationship again. You approve of thing this time. I'm seen as responsible for the thing, but you dislike me. Now, in this kind of situation, all of the symbols around the edges of this triangle are not the same. They're not all positive. We've got this negative attitude towards me, which is kind of out of place. Or we could say that the positive attitude towards the thing is out of place. If I'm responsible for this thing and you like it, why do you dislike me? Or perhaps you could think of it as being, well, if you dislike me and I'm responsible for this thing, why do you like it? Why do you like this thing that I'm responsible for when you dislike me? So there's imbalance. There's pressure for change. There's inconsistency amongst the attitudes that are being held there. Now, how can that be rebalanced? So we've got this situation here again. You dislike me, you like the thing, I'm responsible for it. How might that change? Well, it might change in a number of different ways. It might be that you simply rebalance your system of perceptions by developing a liking for me. Now, again, you might think that provides you with an opportunity for manipulation. It's not just that these things happen. You may be aware, or I may be aware, that you dislike me and that you really approve of this thing. Now, it might be that I can play the game, that I can manage your perceptions, I can manipulate the way that you feel by making sure that I am seen as being responsible for that thing, that I place myself in a position where I am responsible for that thing, that you are actually intervening in the process rather than it just happening. Okay, so the system can be rebalanced, either naturally, or it can be rebalanced by giving it a bit of a nudge, by playing the game, by making sure you can kind of play around with these kind of relationships in a variety of different ways. And if you're interested, Walter McKersey give a variety of different examples of how these kinds of situations might be manipulated in a variety through a variety of mechanisms. So cognitive balance theory provides us with an opportunity to rebalance systems of cognition, systems of perception in ways like this. Now, I said I was going to mention reinforcement theory And reinforcement theory might see this in a slightly different way. And reinforcement theory tends to be, well, it's often a little bit crude, in that if we want to alter people's cognitions, if someone is doing something we disapprove of, how do we change the way that that's going to work? How do we change people's behaviour? Well, it might be that we punish them when they do something that's wrong. I mean, actually, in reinforcement theory, they talk about negative reinforcement and, actually things that depend on all kinds of controlled conditions, which are not usually available to us within an organisational setting. And so, typically that might come across as a fairly crude punishment. Somebody does something you disapprove of within the employment relationship, you bang them over the head with a bit of a sharp stick, and that gives them the idea that maybe they don't do it again. Maybe a less brutal way is to reward people. Reward the other side when they do things that you do approve of, that you encourage them into patterns of behaviour that you're much more happy with, and that encourages and tends to see those patterns of behaviours repeated in other situations, that people like getting those positive strokes from you. So, attitudinal structuring. We can use cognitive balance theory, maybe we're going to think about using reinforcement theory. The point being that the bargaining within the employment relationship isn't something that just happens within, kind of set piece types of activities, but also happens as a more general pattern of behaviour as well. Like any other relationship, it builds up as we go along. We build up the ways in which we interact with each other, and the relationship develops on the basis of those interactions. And it might be part of our arsenal, part of our game plan, that we can play quite a sophisticated game by understanding not just whether or not we're getting on with each other, whether or not we're trusting each other, but also about utilising other kinds of perceptions, other kinds of attitudes, and altering our position in relationship to them in order to create a more conducive set of attitudes to pursue our interests within the relationship. And we'll leave it there for today.